As you already know, Ferrari always get in their way. They manage to find a way to screw themselves and ruin their races, and not just races, but entire seasons in a row. So I thought it'll be a fun exercise to go and revisit some of their biggest fuck ups in the 2025 Formula 1 season. The first Ferrari blunder happened in the first race of the season, which is in Australia. And the race was first it was wet, then it was dry, and then it was wet again. I'm talking about the track conditions. So during the dry phase in the middle, both of the Ferraris were looking solid to finish in the top 5. But then the rain came. Now Ferrari thought that the rain is gonna pass away, no big deal. They just need to persevere and weather the storm. However, the rain was there to stay, and their strategy to persevere backfired, and instead of both of the drivers finishing in the top 5, Hamilton finished P10 and Leclerc finished P8, and Fred Vasseur had this to say: "Then today the strategy was not easy, we made the wrong call at the end, let's face it. We tried to stay out like Max to survive with slicks, and then it started to rain because we thought mistakenly that the slow wasn't going to last that long. Has this worked out? It would have been lovely, but it didn't. That's it, we lost." That's my best impression of this guy. I'm still improving, but again, the first blunder of Ferrari came in the first race of the 2025. If this is not Ferrari's year, I don't know what is. The second blunder of Ferrari in 2025 came in the second Grand Prix of the 2025 Formula 1 season, which is China. Now, China was a complete Ferrari experience package because Lewis Hamilton won the sprint race from pole position, his first ever sprint pole and his first ever sprint win, and also Ferrari's first ever sprint pole and Ferrari's first ever sprint win. But things got to shit as soon as the main race ended because both of the Ferrari drivers were disqualified from the classification. Charles Leclerc's car was 1 kilo underweight because he ran a one-stop strategy and a lot of fuel burnt out and the tire degradation was too high, and the Lewis Hamilton rear plank wore too much. The reason is they ran his car a little bit too close to the ground because that's how Hamilton likes it, and they didn't made the calculations correctly, I guess, due to which the plank worn off excessively throughout the course of the race. It was half a millimeter, but enough to get both of these guys, not both of these guys, I mean that got Hamilton disqualified. Leclerc was disqualified for a reason, and this actually started some other performance issues for the Tifosi, not for the Tifosi but the Scuderia, mental issues for the Tifosi from the Chinese Grand Prix. The third Ferrari blunder came from the third race of the 2025 season in the Japanese Grand Prix. So what happened is, in China, Lewis Hamilton's car was disqualified because of excessive rear skid wear, and because of that Ferrari went on a conservative strategy and raised the ride height by a bit too much. And because of this, the performance of Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari was a little bit suboptimal and he only qualified in P8. Now the race was obviously extremely boring. It was unlike any other Japanese Grand Prix in history. There was only one overtake in the entire session. It reminded me of Monaco and I fell asleep for like 20 laps in the race. Lewis Hamilton actually made the only overtake, I think, and he overtook Isaac Hadjar for P7. Charles Leclerc started P4 and finished P4, and that was that. The fourth race of the 2025 season happened in Bahrain, and although there were not many problems or Ferrari blunders, there were still some issues. So for instance, in the qualifying session, Lewis Hamilton fucked up. He couldn't manage to extract the maximum performance out of the car, his words, and he apologized to the team because of that. He qualified P9. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, he qualified in P3 but experienced some issues during the race, and the issue is excessive tire degradation, something Red Bull also experienced in the same Grand Prix. And this is kind of related to the setup issue of the car and the performance limitations of the car. So it's not really any fuck up made by the team or the drivers or any kind of miscommunication issues. It was just one of those races in which Ferrari maximized everything, which is a positive sign for the team. But unfortunately, it was a weekend in which they were not the most dominant car. And because of the excessive tire wear, Charles Leclerc was forced to do a two-stop strategy, and compared to him, George Russell, who beat Charles Leclerc to the podium position, he did a one-stop strategy. So if Ferrari kind of had that issue right, then they would have been on the podium. But then again, it's a mechanical issue. There is not much you can do about it. Lewis Hamilton, after qualifying P9, he finished the race P5. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton P4 and P5. So overall, this was not a fuck-up weekend. Round 4 saved. Round 5, Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This is also another weekend where nothing went wrong. Again, I am as surprised as you are. But both sides of the garages have completely different stories. Charles Leclerc finished on the podium. He scored the first podium for Ferrari of 2025 in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. On the other hand, Lewis Hamilton just struggled. He struggled to qualify, and he is like, the performance of the car is pretty bad. He qualified P7, finished the race P7. Charles Leclerc qualified P4, and he finished the race on the podium. After the race, Charles Leclerc said that Ferrari are doing something wrong during the qualifying sessions and emphasized that they need to do better in the qualifying runs in order to start ahead of the Mercedes so that they can have clear air and they can pull away and get consistent podiums. Round 6, the Miami Grand Prix. This is where Ferrari had their 4th blunder of the 2025 Formula 1 season. So the qualifying was, shit. Lewis Hamilton qualified P12 and Charles Leclerc qualified P9, so there's nothing much there. And when the race started, Hamilton started on hard tires and Leclerc started on mediums. After the first round of pit stops, Lewis Hamilton was behind Charles Leclerc. Now this time, he was on the medium tires and Leclerc was on hards. The medium tires were easy to warm up and Hamilton was getting furious behind Charles Leclerc and he was screaming on the radio that let me through, let me use the space. This time, both of the Ferraris were running P7 and P8 at the moment. Leclerc was in P7 and Hamilton behind him, P8 on medium tires. Leclerc was ahead of him on hard tires after the first round of pit stops. And then Lewis was screaming on the radio and he's like, let me through, let me use the space. P6 Kimi Antonelli is right ahead. I can go up to him. I can, attack him. Now, Ferrari took their sweet little time to make the swap. And by this time, Lewis Hamilton has used up his tires and there was a lot of sassy radio exchanges. And this is the moment in which Lewis Hamilton said on the radio that this is not good teamwork, as this headline says. He also said that have a tea break while you're at it, because Ferrari hit back Hamilton with their classic we are checking. So after they do the swap, and then by the time the swap actually happens, Lewis Hamilton's medium tires are fucked up and now Charles Leclerc's hard tires are warmed up. And now Leclerc is screaming on the radio that now you gotta let me through because now I can go and attack Kimi Antonelli. At the end of the race, none of them were able to attack Kimi Antonelli. In fact, both of them were actually under pressure from Carlos Sainz in P9. And in the final lap, I think in the final corner of the race, Carlos Sainz just sends it around the outside and him and Lewis Hamilton touch briefly. So one of the biggest blunders of the 2025 season so far happened in the Miami Grand Prix. Round 6, 4th blunder of Ferrari. Round 7, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. So this is the race where Ferrari actually had a good weekend. So both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc didn't qualify well, P11 and P12. This relates to what Leclerc said about the qualifying issues of the SF75 in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. He said that Ferrari is doing something wrong in the qualifying spec, but in race spec, they seem to have good pace. So the same issue was still not resolved until the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. And they qualified P11, P12, and they finished P4 and P6. Hamilton P4 and Leclerc P6. The thing is, Leclerc could have finished P5, or maybe both of the Ferrari drivers could have even challenged for the podium positions. But Leclerc was a little bit stuck. Not stuck, but he got unlucky because of the virtual safety car and the safety car. He didn't manage to catch either of those, and he didn't have new set of fresh tires, but Hamilton did. And this actually worked out for him. And he finished P4, his strongest Grand Prix finish in Ferrari so far. Round 8, the Monaco Grand Prix. The 5th blunder of Ferrari happens in Monte Carlo, in which, it's not a big blunder, but basically Lewis Hamilton impedes Max Verstappen during the qualifying session. The radio engineer of Lewis Hamilton, Riccardo Adami, he forgot to mention that to him. He initially said that Verstappen is not on a push lap, and then he actually was, and eventually Lewis Hamilton had to deal with a 3-place grid penalty. due to which his race was basically compromised from this point, because in Monaco you couldn't really overtake. But fortunately, this is as surprising to you as it is to me, Ferrari managed to pull off a good strategy. They managed to undercut a couple of cars and got Lewis Hamilton ahead of where he started the race. He started the race in P7, he finished in P5, pretty decent, all things considered. The problem is his teammate Charles Leclerc was P2 on the podium, so this kind of reflects poorly on Hamilton. And there was also extra radio drama because during the middle of the race, Hamilton was, doing his own race. He was in no man's land. And in the radio, he asked Riccardo Adami something about the pace of the McLarens and the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc ahead of him. And then Adami replied with him with random data. He just said that they are on this tire, they are on this strategy or something like that. And then Lewis Hamilton kind of just blasted him on the radio. He said that you're not answering the question. Answer the fucking question. And then he said he's like 48 seconds behind the race leader at that time or something like that. And after the race, Hamilton asked his engineer, are you mad at me or something? And then there was just radio silence from the engineer side. Then there was a little bit of media speculation about something issues happening within the team. Fred Vasseur downplayed the whole thing in front of everyone, but I think it's not that big of a deal anyway, because these type of disagreements happen, and Ferrari is Ferrari. They always manage to pull things together only to never perform again. Round 9, the Spanish Grand Prix. This was again a story of two contrasting sides of the Ferrari garage, because Lewis Hamilton just had a shit weekend and Charles Leclerc was on the podium. So both of them qualified decent, Hamilton P5, Leclerc P6, but Leclerc had more pace. Right, and Hamilton's car suffered some problem and he complained on the radio that this is the worst car that I've ever driven. The balance is entirely off and some stuff like that. And after the race, they confirmed that Hamilton's car had some technical issue, and due to which he was very relieved. But during the race, he just had a great struggle. And in the final lap of the race, he was overtaken for P6 by Nico Hülkenberg. He was classified P6 at the end of the race because Max Verstappen got a 10-second penalty for crashing into George Russell. That's a fun moment. But Ferrari overall had a decent weekend. If Hamilton did not have damage onto his car, then I am pretty sure he could have finished right behind Leclerc, or maybe ahead of Leclerc in P3 himself. Finally, round 10. Now, the Canadian Grand Prix was a little bit of a mixed bag. It's not something that Ferrari did. It's the thing that happened to them. So Charles Leclerc on one side of the garage, he thought that he could make the one-stop work, and initially he talked about it to his race engineer Brian Bozzi on the radio, and he said okay, but after that they pitted him, and after pitting him, Charles Leclerc knew that he was on a two-stop strategy. Amazing surprises, what Ferrari does to a motherfucker, am I right? And after that surprise, he was complaining on the radio, and some Italian guy called Davide Valesici, who was commentating, he just said, Leclerc to shut up and drive. He said that literally, his words. And on the other side of the garage, Lewis Hamilton killed a groundhog. This is the dead body of the groundhog that Lewis Hamilton, who is a vegan, has killed. And due to this, he got some damage onto his Ferrari, and then he just struggled throughout the race. The drivers finished in P5 and P6. It was a decent race overall. I don't think Leclerc could have done better than P5, even if he tried to pull off the one-stop strategy. I mean, first of all, I don't even think that they could have pulled off the one-stop strategy. And ahead of him, the 4 cars ahead of Charles Leclerc were the 2 Mercedes, and they were very fast, and 1 Red Bull of Max Verstappen, who is impossible to overtake, and then the McLaren of Oscar Piastri, who is also very, very strong. Thank God that Lando Norris crashed into the back of Piastri, and which updated the positions of both of the Ferrari drivers, which is the best I think they could have done that weekend. So this was my overall rundown of how Ferrari's 2025 campaign was going. There were a few big fuck-ups, like the season opener in Australia, the second race of the season in China, the third race of season in Japan, and then in Miami. So they made some major fuck-ups, but also at times it was evident that they struggled with the qualifying pace, and their race pace was not as good as the McLaren's and the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, and sometimes the Mercedes also had the pace advantage over them. And in some situations, just funny things just happened to them, and there's not much they could do about it. At this point, they're P3 in the constructor standings. I think that's where they're going to finish. I don't think these guys are going to make a comeback because Mercedes are just going to be consistent. You know, uh, George Russell is as consistent as it gets, and Mercedes as a team, they're very professional. And now Kimi Antonelli has his first podium in the Canadian Grand Prix, and he is definitely confident behind the wheel. And I think they're definitely going to pull away from Ferrari and finish this season P2 in the constructor standings. I'll be more than happy to be proven wrong, but I don't think Ferrari getting closer and passing Mercedes unless they bring some upgrades that improve their both qualifying and the race pace. But the next race is Austria, and Mercedes have historically struggled in that track. So I guess we will find out. Otherwise, P3 in the constructor standings is probably the best they can do because Red Bull has only one driver, or rather they have a car that only one of their drivers can drive. The second Red Bull driver is the cursed seat. So P3 for Ferrari in the constructors 2025, down from P2 in 2024. This is the Ferrari way forward. We will see if their future upgrades bring any good results, and we will see if there are any more interesting blunders in the remaining 14 Grand Prix of the season. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.